The defense in Paul Manafort's trial on tax and bank fraud charges has rested its case without calling a single witness. The move comes after the judge dismissed a defense motion to acquit Manafort on certain charges earlier today. So joining us now from outside the courthouse in Alexandria, Virginia, is CBS News Washington correspondent Paula. So Paula, I know you were in the courthouse. Walk us through what happened in court today.
So far this morning, the judge had a closed hearing for quite some time with attorneys from both sides. We don't actually know what was decided as part of, I guess, a secret hearing, right? What's the first rule of a secret hearing? You don't know what happened there. But once we were allowed in, probably after about 2 hours, he dealt with some of the administrative matters that he has to handle before the defense put on its case. He decided, as you noted right there, he decided that he would not dismiss some of the counts against Manafort. Sort of a formality that you do after the prosecution puts on its case. Wasn't very surprising that he decided not to dismiss those. But then many people were surprised that the defense opted to rest without calling any witnesses. And of course, one of the witnesses they could have called was Manafort himself, and he chose not to testify. The judge brought him up to the podium. We heard him speak. He said that he has consulted with his attorneys and decided of his own volition not to testify in this case. Now, the jury cannot actually consider that or count that against them when they go into deliberations. I think the real big headline here is that this case will go to the jury tomorrow morning. They will actually get this case after closing arguments from both sides.
So I don't think anyone was surprised that Paul Manafort did not take the stand in his own defense, but no defense witnesses at all. Do you think that was part of the strategy all along, or perhaps the strategy they decided to implement after they saw the prosecution's case?
Well, I think the strategy has been evolving, both, as you noted, with the prosecution's case. They may have called many of the same witnesses. They already got a chance to cross-examine them. They also have a judge who's constantly telling them to expedite. So it's possible they could have stipulated to some things. But we have to remember this strategy to push through with this trial, knowing it is likely that Mr. Manafort will be convicted given the evidence. The strategy here is that I am told by sources close to Mr. Manafort that he is banking on a presidential pardon. So perhaps it's a different approach than it would be if you truly thought you stood a good chance of spending the rest of your life in prison. So it was a surprise, but it's not a completely unacceptable strategy because, of course, his attorneys have had the chance to cross-examine dozens of witnesses.
Yeah, I wanted to sort of expand on that, hoping for a pardon argument, because that was one of the arguments that I heard, that if Paul Manafort took the stand, there would be so many things for him to have to answer to that it might make it challenging for the president to pardon him, because it just wouldn't look good.
That's right. I mean, the optics of a presidential pardon here, that's going to ultimately be up to the White House if Mr. Manafort is convicted. But when it comes to just putting him on the stand, I mean, it's very difficult to ever find a defendant for whom it is a great idea to put them on the stand because, like you said, there's so many different things they could get into. There would likely be some contentious back and forth between the defense and the prosecution. It just doesn't seem in this particular case, with the paper trail, with all the documents he'd have to testify, that would have been the best choice for Mr. Manafort. He has excellent lawyers, and they conference and they decided that just wasn't the best decision for him.
So let's talk about the closing arguments for tomorrow. What can we expect to hear? And when can we expect the jury to reach a verdict, do you think? Any predictions on that?
I don't know if I have a prediction for how long it'll take the jury to decide. I think it's always dangerous to predict what any group of 12 people will do or how long it'll take them to do it. But they have 18 different counts to consider. So if they get this case tomorrow around noon, I think it would be unlikely that we get a decision tomorrow, just all the paperwork, all the votes that they'd need to take. But in terms of closing arguments, I think you're going to hear the same themes that you heard in opening statements for the defense. They're going to argue that this was about trust and taxes. They will continue to argue that Mr. Manafort put his trust in his associate, Rick Gates. He trusted him to properly file their taxes, their financial forms, and that he did not do that. They're also going to bring up, I'm sure, the fact that Mr. Gates embezzled from Mr. Manafort. For the prosecution, they're probably going to lay out a summary of their case, just like they did in opening statements. They're going to argue that Mr. Manafort earned tens of millions of dollars lobbying on behalf of foreign officials, and instead of having the checks sent to his homes here in the U.S., that he allegedly stashed that in offshore accounts and then allegedly laundered it into the U.S. through these purchase of luxury goods. They'll also visit a lot of records that he filed, documents that he filed when he was applying for loans, allegedly fraudulently. So I think you're going to see a little mini summary of the case from the prosecution, but with the defense, it's going to be sort of a larger theory, which they describe as taxes and trust.
So, though the special counsel's investigation into Russia's meddling in the election is what led us here, This trial has nothing to do with collusion or the president or anything along those lines. Still, if Manafort is convicted, could it have an impact on the special counsel's investigation?
Not so much the investigation itself, but I think many people see this as somewhat of a referendum on the integrity of the special counsel's investigation. If there was to be an acquittal here, I think there would be some serious questions, and people who want to undermine the credibility or question the credibility of the special counsel probe, they would say, look, I told you, the special counsel has been trying to dig up all this dirt, and it wasn't enough to convince a jury of his peers to convict him. This is clearly politically motivated. I think that would really undermine the credibility, the public perception of the investigation. But in terms of the day-to-day operations, I don't think they're going to really change course based on what happens here in Virginia over the next few days.
All right, Paula Reid, thank you so much.